Ava, you're suspended without pay for 2 weeks. You will apologize to your sister, or you don't come back." My father dropped the sentence like a gavel, his voice bouncing off the glass walls of the boardroom. Harper sat 2 chairs down, lipstick perfect, that small, satisfied smile tugging at the corner of her mouth while the board stared at their hands. No one looked at me. No one said a word. I closed my laptop, laid the presentation clicker on the mahogany table, and felt my heart beat slow instead of spike. "All right," I said, calm, flat. "I'm Ava Morrison, 33. The person who actually keeps this company alive." But what they didn't know was that I was done protecting them. "Before I go on, tell me where you're watching from, and hit like and subscribe if you've ever been betrayed by your own family." Stories like mine aren't rare, but most people never speak them out loud. Stay with me, this one goes somewhere they never saw coming. My name is Ava Morrison. I'm 33 years old, Director of Product Development at Morrison Dynamics. And for most of my life, I've been the daughter who learned to make herself small so other people could shine. People assume growing up in a family business means privilege, comfort, a built-in future. They never picture the quiet kid in the corner, watching her sister get applauded for simply walking into a room, while her own achievements passed like background noise. One of my earliest memories is of sitting at our kitchen table, staring at a science trophy I'd won that morning. The metal still smelled warm, like overheated machinery, and I kept running my fingers over the engraved letters to make sure they were real. Dad walked in, tie loosened, shoulders broad and tired. I turned toward him, trophy already half lifted, waiting for that spark of pride. But before I could speak, Harper burst through the doorway, waving a flyer from a local TV station hosting auditions for a teen talent show. She didn't even look at me. Dad didn't either. He picked her up, spinning her once, laughing in a way I had never heard directed at me. I set the trophy down. The metal felt colder that time. I swallowed the sting. Still, it carved deeper than I thought. Years later, when the MIT acceptance letter arrived, I could barely breathe. I unfolded it again and again, the paper softening at the creases as if absorbing my heartbeat. Mom was the one who cried first, pressing my face into her shoulder, saying, "I knew you'd make it out there." But that night, when we sat at the dinner table, Dad spent 20 minutes scrolling through venue options for Harper's engagement party. Every time I tried to speak, he said, "Just a minute, sweetheart." The minute never came. After everyone went to bed, Mom quietly slipped a handwritten note under my bedroom door. "You don't need to become someone else to be worth loving." Back then, I didn't understand why she wrote it. I just kept it between the pages of a physics textbook and pretended I didn't need it. I didn't know it then, but these moments would matter later. When I first joined Morrison Dynamics, at 26, I came from a world where logic ruled everything. Big tech had flaws, but at least numbers meant something. If you delivered results, people listened. Morrison Dynamics was different. My father had built the company from a garage into a multimillion-dollar powerhouse, and he talked about it like a third child. Maybe that was why he never really saw me in it. He already had a favorite daughter. And it wasn't me. My first week there, I noticed how Harper floated from department to department like a guest of honor. She'd tilt her head, toss her hair, flash that media-trained smile, and people bent around her like she had her own gravitational field. I, meanwhile, sat in a corner office stacked with outdated documentation, broken processes, and a dev team exhausted from impossible expectations. The first meeting I ever led, half the room whispered, "Who's she?" under their breath. The other half looked relieved. Any change was better than none. I took a breath, rolled up my sleeves, and began the long work of cleaning up messes no one wanted to admit existed. It wasn't glamorous, but the team noticed. Slowly, carefully. The first time Marco, one of our senior engineers, slid a mug onto my desk, labeled World's Okayest Boss. I laughed so hard I nearly spilled coffee over the sprint board. It wasn't sarcasm, it was gratitude wrapped in humor. A sign they trusted me. But even as I built credibility from the ground up, Harper built a persona. She said things like, "We're a vision-driven company. Numbers follow vision," which sounded inspiring in a pitch deck, but was catastrophic in front of a client expecting concrete delivery dates. There was one project, 2 years before Helix Global, where Harper had promised an app redesign in 6 weeks. My estimates were 90 days minimum. When I pushed back, she tilted her chin at me and said, "Just be more creative. Ava, don't limit us." Dad echoed her. "Your sister believes in the team. Why don't you?" So I saved them. Quietly, my developers worked 70-hour weeks. I covered budget overruns out of my own bonus. When the launch succeeded, Harper accepted an industry award for innovative leadership. I stood in the back of the room clapping, my hands numb. Later that night, when everyone had gone home, I sat alone in my office and realized that loyalty, in our family, only mattered when it benefited someone else. But I still stayed. Because Mom had believed I could make a place there. Because Dad occasionally looked at me like he almost saw me. Because Harper, for all her bravado, still sometimes called me late at night with that small, panicked voice. "Do you think Dad's proud of me?" And I didn't have the heart to tell her the truth. I didn't know it back then. But all of this, the ignored achievements, the late nights, the swallowed pride was kindling, waiting for a match. My mother's death was the fault line that finally split our family into 2 uneven halves. She'd had a mild stroke 3 months after I joined the company. The kind people survive all the time. But she didn't. One minute she was reminding me to rest more, drink more water, stop taking the elevator because your legs need fresh air. And the next minute she was gone. The morning after the funeral, Dad sat at the kitchen table, staring at a cup of untouched coffee while Harper rehearsed her eulogy for Mom's memorial fundraiser. Her voice sounded polished, theatrical. Mine wouldn't come out at all. I remember standing by the sink, feeling my throat burn, thinking Mom was the only person who really knew me. Without her, no one in that house would even try. Years later, Aunt Patty told me something I didn't know. That in the weeks before she died, Mom had begun meeting quietly with a lawyer, Monica Reyes, the same one who would later help me review my non-compete. Mom had planned to shift part of her future shares to me, not because she loved me more, but because she feared Dad would keep raising the bar until I broke under it. She wrote in her journal that she worried I might spend my entire life trying to earn something he didn't know how to give. Patty showed me a line written in Mom's looping handwriting. "If one day Ava feels like she's losing her mind, tell her she's not imagining it." I didn't know whether to cry or scream. I chose neither. I folded the journal shut and held it to my chest like a heartbeat I thought I'd lost. When Mom died, Harper stepped fully into the role she'd always wanted, the emotional center of the family, the unofficial co-CEO. Dad leaned on her more, praised her more. He'd walk into a room and say, "Harper, I need your input on something," while passing right by my desk. She absorbed it like oxygen. I pretended it didn't matter. But every time her voice floated through the office, bright and confident, performative, I felt something in my ribs tighten. Still, I worked harder than ever. My team became my real home. Late-night takeout containers littered my office. Half-finished diagrams were taped to the walls. Someone once brought in a tiny cactus labeled "for when you forget sunlight exists." I laughed so loudly that James looked up from his laptop, startled. He'd worked with me for 5 years and told me once, quietly, "When you laugh like that, the whole floor relaxes." That comment mattered more than anything Dad had said in years. But as the months passed, the gap between Harper's fantasies and our actual capabilities widened. I kept telling myself she'd learn, that she'd slow down, that Dad would finally see the pattern. Instead, the projects got bigger, scarier, and more unrealistic. Harper would breeze into my office with glossy mock-ups she'd promised without checking feasibility. She'd hold them up like trophies. "Don't worry, Ava," she'd say, twisting her smile into something sharp. "I told them you're brilliant. You'll make it work." And I did. Every time. Even when it cost me. Even when my team looked at me with that exhausted mix of gratitude and fear. Even when Dad said, "See, your sister has great instincts." But the truth was simpler. She didn't have instincts. She had immunity. Everything changed the night she called me drunk from a hotel in Los Angeles. Her voice was thin, cracking like she was holding herself together with her fingernails. "Do you think Dad's proud of me?" she whispered. "Or does he just need me to be the one who looks good for a second?" She sounded like the little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms because she didn't want Dad to see her afraid. I almost told her the truth that he didn't know either of us well enough to be proud or disappointed. But I didn't. I just said, "Get some sleep, Harper." When the call ended, the silence felt like a confession neither of us was brave enough to make. I didn't know it then. But the Helix Global deal would be the final collision point of every buried resentment, every ignored warning sign, every wound stitched shut with obligation. It would be the one promise Harper made that I refused to save her from. The one time I chose myself and my team over the illusion of family unity. It would be the moment everything broke, and finally, the moment everything made sense. The Monday of the Helix Global disaster didn't begin like a crisis. It began like any other day where I woke before sunrise, made coffee strong enough to jolt my nerves awake, and skimmed through sprint updates on my laptop while rain tapped against my kitchen window. Seattle rain always smells faintly metallic, like wet pavement in the inside of an old elevator. That morning, it felt heavier than usual, humming against the glass like a warning. By 8:45, I arrived at Morrison Dynamics. The lobby lights flickered in that familiar fluorescent way, too cold, too bright, too indifferent. People hurried past with notebooks, coffee cups, clipped conversations. No one knew yet that by noon the building would feel like a pressure cooker. At 9 a.m., Harper stormed into the strategy meeting already buzzing with adrenaline. She wore a white blazer that made her look angelic to people who didn't know better. She clapped her hands once. "Huge news," she announced. "Helix Global is in. They're signing for the biggest contract we've ever landed." Applause broke out. My father stood and hugged her. He didn't even look in my direction. I opened the pitch deck she had sent the night before and felt my stomach plummet. There were 4 exclusive features she promised, none of which were in our current architecture. Worse, she had listed a 5-week delivery timeline. 5 weeks. Even if the entire engineering team stopped sleeping today, we'd barely have a prototype. I leaned over to her, keeping my voice low. "You didn't run these features by me?" She didn't turn her head. She smiled at Dad instead, then whispered back without moving her lips, "Just support me for once." Support her. Like the 6-week redesign that took 14. Like the custom CRM she promised overnight. Like the integration she guaranteed would be easy even though it required rewriting half our backend. "I need to tell them the real timeline," I said. "You will not." She snapped softly. "Don't ruin this for me." Ava. Me. Ruin this for her. I didn't say anything else, not until the meeting ended and I returned to my office. The walls of glass made me visible to everyone on the floor. But I felt strangely invisible. Like a fish in a tank, nobody bothered to look at closely. I typed the email slowly, carefully. To Helix Global, CC Executive Board Subject, Updated Timeline Assessment. The words were clinical, professional, factual, 12 weeks required. Feature requests needing rescoping. Risk of legal breach if expectations were misaligned. No emotion, just truth. When I hit send, something in me loosened like a knot I'd carried since childhood had finally released. I didn't know it then, but the ripple would become a tidal wave by noon. 30 minutes later, Harper burst into my doorway. She didn't knock. She rarely did. "You undercut me," she hissed. "In front of our biggest client. You promised something we can't deliver. You made me look incompetent. You did that to yourself." Her eyes glisten not with sadness, but with rage that trembles just before it ignites. "Dad will handle this." She was right. He did. 3 hours later, in the boardroom, he announced my suspension. 2 weeks. Without pay. Until I apologized. It should have felt humiliating. But instead it felt clarifying. Like the moment before a storm breaks. When the wind goes still and the world holds its breath. Word spread through the office faster than wildfire. By the time I returned to my desk, 3 Slack messages popped up. "James, what's happening? Harper said you were disciplined." "Sarah, are you okay, Marco? Is this a joke?" But the worst message wasn't from them. It was from Dad. "We'll discuss your return when you're ready to be cooperative." Cooperative. I stared at the word until my vision blurred. Years of leadership. Years of saving failed promises. Years of covering budget holes. Years of swallowing humiliation. Reduced to one accusation, uncooperative. I started packing. Not dramatically. Not angrily. Just methodically. The degree from MIT. The awards. The holiday photo of my team. Every item felt like peeling back a layer of skin I'd forgotten was tender. Whispers drifted down the hallway as people passed. I heard she sabotaged the Helix deal. No way. Ava's the most competent person here. Well, Harper said. If Harper said it, it's probably wrong. I pretended not to hear any of it. Then Aunt Patty called. "Your father just phoned me," she said. "He thinks you're having some kind of breakdown." I laughed sharp. Humorless. A breakdown? Yes. I told him suspending you for doing your job was the stupidest thing he's done in 40 years. I paused. How did he react? He hung up on me. The soft thrum of vulnerability slipped into her voice. "Sweetheart, your mother saw this pattern years ago. She worried he'd crush your spirit without even realizing it." My throat tightened. Patty continued. "Before she died, she gave me a letter. For you. Said you might need it someday." A letter. From Mom. A message she wrote knowing Dad and Harper wouldn't understand me the way she did. The thought made my knees go weak. "If you want it," Patty whispered, "it's yours." That night, my resignation letter practically wrote itself. By morning, the first aftershock hit Harper was telling everyone she'd finally held me accountable. And suddenly managers who never took my side began nodding along, eager to stay aligned with the family power. Another wound, deeper than the last. But beneath it all, something else was growing too. Resolve. By the next morning, the air inside Morrison Dynamics felt different, charged. Electric. Thick with rumor. People looked at me sideways as I walked through the lobby, clutching the leather portfolio that held both my resignation letter and every ounce of dignity I had left. It was strange moving through a place I had practically built from the inside. Knowing this would be the last time I'd see these walls as someone who belonged. I reached the executive floor. And immediately I could tell something was wrong. My office door, my glass sanctuary, stood wide open. And inside, sitting in my chair as if she had earned 1 hour of its weight, was Harper. She was rifling through drawers I'd already emptied. Her expression tight. Frantic. She looked up quickly. You had no right to send that email yesterday. I stepped into the doorway, not crossing the threshold. I sent accurate information. You embarrassed me. She spat. In front of Helix. In front of the board. Dad is furious. I didn't flinch. Facts aren't embarrassing unless you ignore them. Her cheeks flushed. It was the same shade she got as a kid when she'd been caught lying, but refused to admit it. Dad's going to fire you for this. I'm not staying long enough to be fired. I held up the portfolio. I'm here to make it official. For a second, something flickered across her face, fear, disbelief. But just as quickly, she smothered it beneath indignation. So that's it. You run the moment things get hard. I let out a breath that felt older than my body. Nothing about this has been hard. It's been predictable. Before she could answer, footsteps echoed down the hallway. Heavy. Familiar. Dad appeared in the doorway. Breath shallow. Wearing the same suit as yesterday, but with deeper wrinkles across the shoulders as if he hadn't slept. Conference room. Now, he said. But behind him stood Ethan Rhodes, the company lawyer, carrying a laptop and a comm that bordered on clinical. Conference room is appropriate, Ethan said. We need documentation for all employment matters moving forward. The shift in his tone told me everything. This was no longer a family dispute. This was liability control. Inside the room, the atmosphere was thick enough to choke on. The same chairs, the same table, but today, the room felt smaller, as if the walls had crept inward during the night. Ethan opened the laptop. For compliance reasons, this meeting will be recorded. Dad bristled. That's not necessary. It is, Ethan replied. Given the information circulated yesterday, Dad's jaw tightened. But he didn't argue. Harper stood behind him like a shadow. Her arms crossed, chest rising and falling too fast. I slid the resignation letter across the table. I'm resigning effective immediately. Dad stared at it as if it were written in a language he didn't understand. Ava, be reasonable. You acted impulsively yesterday. You were upset. Let's talk about Section 7 of my employment contract. I interrupted. States that suspension without documented cause triggers immediate severance. Section 12 states that all stock options vest upon voluntary departure following inappropriate disciplinary action. Ethan nodded once, confirming the accuracy. Dad blinked. You wrote those clauses. And you signed them. Harper leaned forward. This is extortion. No, Ethan said flatly. She's exercising contractual rights the company agreed to 4 years ago. Dad shifted his attention back to me. Do you have any idea how much this will cost the company? I almost laughed. You should ask that question about the Helix promises. Not my severance. That hit harder than I expected. His shoulders stiffened, his jaw working as if biting down guilt or anger. I couldn't tell which. Speaking of Helix, I continued. They're expecting features we can't build in 5 weeks. They've already emailed my team asking for updates. If you proceed on Harper's timeline, you'll miss the deadline, breach the contract, and be sued for damages. Minimum 7 figures. Ethan's face palled. Is that accurate? Yes, I said. Everything is documented. Shared drive under Helix Global. Scope. Timelines. Risk logs. Attachments from the last 12 months, including every instance where Harper promised deliverables without consulting development. Dad turned slowly toward Harper. She swallowed. She's exaggerating. I didn't. It's all in writing, I said softly. Silence flooded the room, thick, cold, final. Dad's voice came out strained. You blindsided us. No, I said. I stopped shielding you. Something shifted then. In his eyes, in Harper's posture, in the weight of the room itself. The unspoken truth rose between us. I had been the safety net, the invisible fixer, The structural integrity beneath a crumbling hierarchy. And now I was pulling away. Dad softened unexpectedly. We can fix this. Take a few weeks off. When you come back. Will, there is no coming back. The words didn't waver. They landed like a closing door. Harper stepped forward. You can't leave. Not like this. You're making us look. I don't care how you look. Her mouth fell open. I care how I live. That was the moment. The real break. The power dynamic flipped so sharply, I could physically feel the air shift. Dad sank back in his chair. Older than I'd ever seen him. Harper looked suddenly small. Like the scaffolding of her confidence had been kicked out from underneath. I stood, collecting the portfolio. Ethan will send the finalized severance documents to my lawyer by end of day. Ethan nodded. Already typing. And for the record, I added. The engineering team has full documentation for the handoff. They'll manage without me. As long as no one forces them to meet fantasy deadlines. Dad's voice cracked. Ava, but I was already walking out. No anger. No theatrics. Just a cold, steady certainty humming beneath my ribs. As I stepped into the hallway, whispers rippled behind me. Some curious, some stunned, some quietly proud. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't walking away from something. I was walking toward myself. The hallway outside the conference room felt colder than it ever had. The kind of cold that sinks into your bones. Not from temperature, but from truth, finally settling in. I walked toward the elevator with the same steady steps of someone leaving a courtroom after delivering a verdict. But the real climax hadn't happened yet. Not even close. I turned the corner toward the tech floor to say goodbye to my team. And that's when the building seemed to tilt. Conversations dropped to whispers. Chairs stopped rolling. Screens dimmed as people froze mid-keystroke. Dozens of eyes lifted toward me. Wide and searching. James stood at the center of it all. Hands shoved deep in his pockets. His face pale. They're calling an emergency leadership meeting upstairs. He murmured. Harper told them you compromised sensitive information. She's trying to make your resignation look like guilt. I let out a slow breath. Of course she is. He stepped closer. They're blaming you for Helix. Even though every document proves otherwise. Stay focused on the project. I said gently. And on the truth. The paper trail protects you. He swallowed hard. Does it protect you? No. I said. But I'm not the one who needs protection anymore. Behind me. The elevator chimed. A pair of executives stepped out quickly, whispers, carrying ahead of them like wind before a storm. They're in the big room. One muttered. Harper's in tears. Richard looks like he's about to faint. Not my problem. I told myself. But the tremor in my chest betrayed me. Part of me needed to hear what came next, not for revenge, but for closure. So I turned around and walked back. By the time I stepped into the boardroom, the atmosphere was electric enough to spark. The lights hummed overhead, casting sharp reflections on the glossy table. Ethan Rhodes was already there. Laptop open. Jaw clenched. A senior board member. Caldwell. Paced near the window. My father sat with both elbows planted on the table, head in his hands. And Harper was standing in the center of the room like a shattered chandelier. All pieces and no structure. She pointed at me the moment I entered. She's trying to destroy the company. Her voice cracked, dramatic and trembling. But everyone had already seen the documentation. Emotion was all she had left. Dad looked up at me. Eyes hollow. Ava. The Helix contract, they called this morning. They said the features they were quoted aren't matching development's reports. That's correct. I said. Because the features don't exist yet. Caldwell stopped pacing. Do you understand the liability here? We could be sued for misrepresentation. Harper's head snapped toward him. It's not misrepresentation. It's ambition. Vision. You told us to think bigger. I told you to negotiate responsibly. Caldwell interrupted sharply. I stood in the doorway, hands relaxed at my sides. I warned you yesterday. Harper overpromised. Again, only this time. The client isn't naive, and the stakes are 10 times higher. Ethan folded his hands. The documentation Ava circulated shows a 12-week estimate. Comparing that with the 5-week timeline provided to Helix, the discrepancy is alarming. Harper whipped around toward him. You're supposed to be on our side. He didn't flinch. I am on the company's side, which means I'm on the side of reality. Dad rose slowly, as if a heavy weight hung from every joint. Why didn't you tell us sooner? Ava, why did you wait until now? A strange, bitter laugh threatened to escape me. I told you for years. I told you every time Harper made impossible promises. Every time the team worked 70-hour weeks. Every time I cautioned against unrealistic scope creep. You just didn't hear me. Or you didn't want to. The silence that followed was suffocating. Dad sank back into his chair. Defeated. Harper's breath hitched, her eyes bright with panic. For the first time in her life, she couldn't talk her way out of this. Caldwell broke the tension. We need someone to lead a damage assessment immediately. All eyes shifted toward me. I lifted my portfolio. Not me. I'm done. Dad pressed a hand against the table. A quiet, desperate gesture. Ava, please. And that was the true climax. Not the suspension. Not the resignation. Not the email. It was this moment my father, the man who never once asked for my help, now asking because the empire he built was cracking and the child he favored couldn't hold it together. I stepped forward, but only so they could hear me clearly. You built a system, I said, that rewarded charm over competence, loyalty over truth, fantasy over feasibility, and now it's collapsing under the weight of its own lies. I'm not here to save it. Not anymore. Harper shook her head violently. You're lying. You always hated me. You wanted to make me look weak. No. Harper. I said softly. You did that all by yourself. Her lips trembled. Dad, say something. But Richard Morrison, king of the boardroom, titan of tech fantasy, had no words left. I turned toward the door. Caldwell called after me. Then what do we tell Helix? I paused. The lights hummed overhead. Somewhere down the hall, a printer clicked to life. The whole building seemed to hold its breath. Tell them the truth, I said, for once. And then I walked out, letting the door swing shut behind me. Cold smile, steady heartbeat. The climax was done. But the revenge, that was only beginning. By the time I stepped outside into the gray Seattle drizzle, the building behind me buzzed like a beehive struck with a stick. I could feel the panic radiating through the glass. I hear the muffled urgency of voices scrambling to undo years of denial in a single morning. My resignation wasn't the bomb. The truth was, I walked to my car, the wet pavement reflecting streaks of neon from the lobby lights. For the first time in years, my shoulders felt light, not empty light. Freedom has a weight of its own, and surprisingly soft. My phone buzzed. A message from Jennifer Blake, the headhunter. The CEO reviewed your portfolio. He wants to meet today. Urgent. Urgent. I smiled at that. After years of begging for space to do my job, another company wanted me urgently. I typed back 2 p.m. Works. Before I pulled out of the lot, another notification arrived, this one from my attorney. Monica Reyes. Saw the documents. Your contract shields you more than you think. Also, your mother left you something. When you're ready. My breath caught. Mom. The one person who had seen me clearly. What she left I didn't know yet. But something told me it mattered. A third alert buzzed. Helix Global emailing directly. They'd forwarded my documentation to their legal department and requested a clarifying conversation. Translation Morrison Dynamics was in trouble. Serious trouble. And here was the twist the company never expected. The only person who fully understood the architecture Harper had promised, the risk model, the timeline, the dependency map, the budget fallout, was me. They had pushed out the one person who could save them. And now, for the first time, the consequences weren't mine to carry. I pulled out of the parking lot, leaving the glass tower shrinking in my rearview mirror. A place that had consumed my 20s. A place I'd tried so hard to belong to. They thought they had destroyed me. But they had just handed me the one weapon I needed: my freedom. And I hadn't even used it yet. If you've ever felt like the outsider in your own family, hit subscribe. Stories like mine don't end in a single chapter. And neither will yours. Walk with me through the next part. Because the truth is, leaving isn't the end. It's the beginning of building something better. Something that's finally yours. This story isn't over.